This is part 2 of the Feasts of the Lord video. We stopped at Pentecost, and I'll get back to that in just a minute, but I wanted to say a couple of things that I probably should have put at the very beginning of the whole thing. You know, I mentioned to you to shy away from people if they're using the months Nisan and Tishri and all of that. But you also need to, if you're going to learn from anybody or do any research, if people call these the Feasts of Israel or Jewish feasts, shy away from them, because again, they're not careful about what they speak about, because that's not what God calls them. God calls them, he says, these are my feasts. And it's important for you to know that the word feast is the word moed, and that means appointed times. So these are my appointed times. That's what God says. Those things are important for you to understand when you're going through the feast days. Now, we started with Pentecost. Pentecost was 50 days from first fruits, and it was on the first day of the week. And remember, the first feast that were celebrated by the Lord was Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, Pentecost is leavened because wheat is leavened. And that's, I mentioned that Saul was crowned king on the wheat harvest, Pentecost. That was obviously before Jesus' time, but, you know, the people of Israel, he was Israel's first king because the people wanted a king because they wanted to be like the other nations. So they were, in essence, rejecting God. At least that's what God said, because Samuel was unhappy because he thought they were rejecting him. But God says, no, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And so Saul was a head taller than everybody. He looked more the part of a king, and so the people wanted him. But God had a king in mind, and that was David. And, you know, he comes after Saul has been king for 40 years. Then David's king for 40 years, and then David's son Solomon is king for 40 years. But anyway, Saul is crowned on Pentecost. So there's something to be said that Pentecost is leavened, which means it's not the true heart of God. And I think you're going to see that same thing at the time of Christ, because Pentecost comes and the Spirit comes on the disciples, and they do all that they do. But again, at the end, and I've talked about this in other videos, they rejected, not the disciples, but the nation of Israel rejected God, rejected Christ, and said, we won't have this man to rule over us. And the kingdom did not come. But God had something else in mind. There was something else on the heart of God, and that was the transcendent grace of God, where God does everything. Okay, So now we've gone through Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now we've gone through Pentecost, and the third feast came in the 7th month. The first one, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, came in the 1st month. Passover was the 14th day. On the 15th day started the Feast of Unleavened Bread. On the first day of the week, in the middle of that 7-day feast, was first fruits. And then 50 days later was Pentecost. And now in the 7th month, on the first day of the 7th month, was the Feast of Trumpets. And these are the the fall feasts. But the Feast of Trumpets was on the first day. Then on the 10th day was a solemn feast called the Day of Atonement. And it came on the 10th day. And then on the 15th day was the Feast of Tabernacles. It is the feast that ends all feasts because it means God dwelling with us. Now, excuse me. There's a couple of things that are important to notice about the Feast of Trumpets. First off, many people who study these things and understand the feast days, they believe that Jesus was born on the Feast of Trumpets. Personally, I believe he was born on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is on the 15th day, so they're 2 weeks apart. But I believe that, and it's not something I'm going to fight over with somebody, because they're both in the 7th month, which clearly Jesus was not born in December, which, again, the way Christianity does things is just off. But I'm not going to fight about whether he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles. The reason I believe he was born on Tabernacles is in John chapter 1, where it says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt is the word tabernacled. So that's what I believe. I believe he was born on the first day of Tabernacles. I believe he was presented on the 8th day of Tabernacles, which is known as the last great day. And because the Tabernacles is 7-day feast, but then the 8th day is called the last great day. So I believe that's when he was born and when he was presented in the temple. But a lot of people believe he was born on trumpets. Okay. Either way, Tabernacles celebrates, they used to call it the Feast of Booths, when they were in the wilderness and God was dwelling with them as they went through the wilderness. God tabernacling with them. So, a couple of things about that. First off, the Feast of Trumpets is the only feast that's on the first day of the month. And because of that, it was the only feast day that you couldn't know days ahead, because every other feast, you're starting on the 14th day of the month, the 10th day of the month, the 15th day of the month. You clearly knew those because you'd already been through the first, second, third, whatever. But because the Feast of Trumpets was on the first day of the month, and as I told you, it's when you can first see that sliver on the right side. Well, because of that, and you didn't know exactly when you were going to see it, they set aside 2 days for the Feast of Trumpets. So you knew that if you didn't see the sliver on the first day, you knew that the next day was going to be the Feast of Trumpets and be the first day of the month. Now, that being said, I'm going to tell you something that you've never heard, wouldn't know, because you're not going to hear it in any kind of organized religion. When Jesus said, "No man knows the day or the hour," it was an idiom. It was word usage. It would be something like us when we say, well, it's raining cats and dogs. Well, it's not really raining cats and dogs, but we mean it's raining hard. So when Jesus said no man knows the day or the hour, he is using an idiom to refer to the Feast of Trumpets. So when Jesus comes back, it will be on the Feast of Trumpets. You don't know the day, which day, and you don't know the hour. And that's what he's referencing. Isn't it funny? Because no matter how lax of a Christian you are, you know that verse. That gets spouted out like crazy. No man knows the day or the hour. Again, they don't know what they're talking about. It's kind of like every Christian knows that verse. They know what they think about hell, and they know what they think about the rapture. And they're 0 for 3. They are 0 for 3 on all of those. So those are important points to see. And I'm going to stop here, because in the next video we're going to go through the crucifixion of Christ and how it fits in with the feast days and with maybe when Christ was actually crucified. So, spring feasts, Pentecost, fall feasts. There are they are there as appointed times by God, and we can go into them. If you ever want to talk about them, we can go into very great detail on them. But those are the things that they happened, and that God set aside times, appointed times, for his work and what he was going to do. I love you all.